Hey, Chapel family, thank you so much for joining us today. In our brief time together, I want to focus on the greatest commandment. Now, I want to read it from its original place. Jesus states it in the Gospels, but he's actually quoting from Deuteronomy. And the reason why I say that in our time together is because I think sometimes you and I, we can fall into this spot where we have this simple view of the Old Testament, in that the Old Testament describes a perfect and holy God, how that holy God has a set of expectations and rules and commandments in terms of living and being human, and you and I, we fall short of that. That while you and I might not break every commandment, we've certainly broke some of them or most of them, and then Jesus steps onto the scene in the New Testament, and he lives the perfect sinless life that you and I couldn't live. And then he goes to the cross, and because of that, you and I, we can have a relationship with God through Jesus where we're fully accepted and loved. But what I want to point out is that from the very beginning of this story, we see a God who created humanity, and he longs, he doesn't need to, but he longs to have a relationship with his creation, and he wants that relationship to be marked by love. And so we read this in Deuteronomy 6:5. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength. Moses wanted to impress this upon the people of Israel. And this was a message that was to be passed on to their children and from generation to generation. That you and I should love the Lord our God with all our heart, our soul, and with all of our strength. I can say it this way. Our entire being is to display that we love God. We are complex creations. We have emotions, we're physical, we're even spiritual, and our entire being is to display that we love God. Now, in our brief time together, I want to focus on just one of those areas. I want to talk about what it means to love God with all of our strength, how to tangibly love God, how to love God from head to toe with our bodies. Now, before I go into loving God with our bodies, I want to briefly talk about this word strength. Now, I'm by no means an English professor, a grammar expert. I'm not an expert in Hebrew, but just doing a little word study on that word strength found here in Deuteronomy 6:5, we see that it's used throughout the Old Testament. It's used both as a noun and an adverb. It's used 298 times, and when we see it as an adverb, think of the word very, or love the Lord your God with your veryness. Now, along those lines, when it gets translated in both the Greek and the Aramaic, we see a translation comes up with the word power and wealth. And what I'm trying to get at, that you and I can love God with our veryness, what I mean by that is not just with our physical body like our limbs, but this also gets at the point of loving God with everything that we have physically. Like whatever resources are at our disposal, we should love God or display that we love God with those. Now here at the chapel, we talk about this idea of our time, our talent, and our treasure. That you and I only have so much time, that God has given us a certain amount. Our life is like a vapor. So how do we love God with our time, knowing that that's one thing we can never get back and we only have a limited supply of it? And then we were given specific talents. And the question is, how do we love God with our talents? Do we use our talents to build our own kingdom that rises and falls with our own life, knowing that we only have so much time? Or do we invest our talents in the kingdom that lasts forever? And that goes with also our treasure. Now, your treasure might not be the same as my treasure, and everyone's to steward their own treasure, but do I put on display that I love God with what He's given me? Are my resources at God's disposal? Does He get my first fruits? Because maybe that would fully put on display that I love God if I show that and demonstrate that what I have, what I steward, I love God with. But I do want to take a few moments and talk specifically about our bodies. We read in 1 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 19, "Don't you know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought at a price. So glorify God with your body." Now, what we read here in 1 Corinthians chapter 6 is that when you and I say yes to God and yes to Jesus in terms of inviting Jesus into our life, giving our life over to Christ, that God by His Spirit indwells our body, that we become a temple of God. Now, people in that day would really understand that, because even at Corinth, you would see temples where gods would dwell. And what Paul was getting at is that you and I now are the dwelling place, both as individuals and even collectively as a community of believers, that we are the temple of God. And what Paul was getting at here is that our body is God's, that I do not own my own body. God does. And so the questions that we can ask ourselves when we think along the lines of loving the Lord our God with all of our strength is, how can I honor God with my body? How can I bring glory to God with my physical self? John, the apostle, in his third letter, 3 John, he's writing to a friend and he says this, "Dear friend, I pray that you may enjoy good physical health and that all may go well with you, even as your soul is getting along well." Now, John recognizes, again, the complexities that we have, that we're emotional and that we're physical and that we're spiritual, right? And so he is talking about this idea of physical health and spiritual health, and not only that it's important maybe to have both, but also how they can be connected at times. And I do think that is something to think about. That's a good statement there, because I do think sometimes the most spiritual thing you and I can do is doing something physical. But I wanted to take a few moments and focus on our physical health. I'm by no means a health expert. I'm not a dietitian, none of that. But I also recognize that even in our culture, a culture that has technology, convenience, and even processed fast food, I do recognize the disadvantages that come with that when it comes to our physical health. Like when we read about heart disease, obesity, diabetes, those sorts of things. And because you and I live in a society where we can be sedentary at times, where we sit on Zoom calls or sit in the office or work from home, where we have a convenience where we can order anything we want on a screen. That's both shopping for clothes or grocery shopping, but even also fast food like tacos and burgers. And I wonder if you've ever taken the time to think through, how do I love God in all of this? If my entire life is me stewarding my resources and my physical body, should I talk to God about the decisions I make related to that? Now, I'm not looking to sell you this idea of living longer or having this body that, this unrealistic, perhaps unattainable body that social media sells you and I. I'm not going down there. I'm just talking about simple lifestyle choices that provide benefits to us in terms of our overall physical health. I want to talk about habits of health. I think spiritual habits are important, and I'm going to end there. I'm going to land there because I do think that is the foundation. But I do want to ask a few questions as it relates to your eating habits, your movement habits, and even your sleep habits. But in terms of your eating, do you ever think about what you put in your body? Do you ever think about what it means to eat in a healthy, well-balanced way? I'm not talking about restricting yourself from anything that tastes good, not that at all, but do you look to have a balanced nutrition? It doesn't surprise me that some of the healthiest things we can eat are whole foods that are grown, like fruits and vegetables. And again, I'm not trying to jam broccoli down your throat if you hate it, but I'm asking, do you ever think about those things? Because there's great health benefits to a number of those whole foods that you and I can consume that fuel our body, that we can use to glorify God. What about exercise? and movement. Now, I also understand some of us, we have physical limitations. Some of us are predisposed in some ways. Some of us have had accidents in our lives. I understand all of those things. But do you look to get out and move? Sometimes the greatest thing to do is to just get outside and move, whatever that looks like. Or go on a walk. And you and I can also go on a walk with God. And again, that's where I'm going to land in a few moments. But we read that even adults 65 or younger just getting 8,000 to 10,000 steps a day. And again, I understand some of us that might not be possible, but you can do activities that are similar or mimic getting those steps. But adults under 65 that get 8,000 to 10,000 steps a day, or a physical activity that is equivalent to it. Great health benefits, not only to your mobility and the longevity of your mobility, but good for your heart. And I just wonder with a number of those things like cardiovascular disease, just how the numbers in our country, I just wonder if you and I ever look at those health habits and wonder what it would mean to ask God, what does it look like to have a healthy, well-balanced lifestyle? And sleep, of course, that makes sense to me. Why? Well, one, because it's in the beginning of the book. We see that God, He models what it means to be human and what it means to rest. We see that in the first 2 chapters. And again, no surprise that as they do studies and they see the benefits of good quality sleep, of both a quantity and a quality of sleep. Now again, I know for some of us, that might be difficult, whether it's the way we're wired, our brains shutting down, or we're not good sleepers, or if we have physical pain. I understand all of that. I'm just asking the questions of, have you ever thought along these lines of how I can love God with my physical body by even just my health habits? Now, of course, we can honor God with our bodies by the way we take care of our bodies physically, but that also includes a number of things with honoring honoring God with our bodies sexually and beyond that. But I also want to land in a spot because I believe that outwardly we will always waste away. That's the effects of sin. And that inwardly we can be renewed each and every day, regardless of whatever season or circumstance we find ourselves in terms of health. Because I do believe to love God with all of our strength, we ultimately need to rest in Him. And I can't help but think of Psalm 46. Where the psalmist says, be still. Where God says through the psalmist, be still and know that I am God. That is a physical posture that leads to an inward spiritual renewal. But that is a physical place and a physical posture. And so I wonder if you ever do that in your life. Do you find a room, whether that's in your house or your apartment? In your house, is it a room? Is it a bedroom? Is it a room up in the attic? Is it down in the basement? Is it a place where you can shut off the noise? You can shut off the distraction and just get alone and be still with God. Or maybe that's in your car. You drive somewhere, you go for a drive, or you sit in a parking lot. Or maybe that's out in a park or next to a river or near Niagara Falls, or you're going down into the southern tier and just getting alone with God in His nature. But I wonder if you ever physically find a spot where God can renew you, because I believe that you can love the Lord your God with all your strength when you and I find rest in Him. And so my question to you in our time together, Chapel family, is this. Do you love the Lord your God with your entire being? Does your entire being put on display that you are in a love relationship with your Creator? And do you love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your strength?